Welcome back to Ozark Garage. Today we're going to build a chiminea out of some scrap. So chiminea is an outdoor fireplace where you can roast s'mores or just hang out and have a good time. And today we've got some scrap that we're going to turn into one here. So this is a steel tank that I believe was for steam or something. You can find stuff like this on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. This one's a little bit bigger than a 20-pound propane cylinder, maybe 1.5 times the size. And this used to be the drive shaft for a Jeep J10. So the first thing I want to do is I want to remove the paint from this tank. I want to do that for a couple of reasons. So number one, I plan to cut the hole with a plasma cutter, and then I have to weld to it. So removing the paint is going to make that much easier. Number two is when you put the fire in this the first time, all this paint is going to burn off and it's going to result in nasty fumes and it's going to look pretty bad. I prefer just to have a kind of weathered look like this drive shaft, which will be the chimney for it. So we're going to strip the paint using some aircraft paint stripper. All right, so this chimney is going to be a little bit different in that it's going to have a door on the front. I want to use the piece that I cut out as the door, which means I get one shot at it. If I were just to cut a square out, it would have sharp corners. And I don't want it to have sharp corners because it doesn't look very good. It's a little unsafe. Ideally, you would do a radius, so a curve on the corner, but that's difficult to do by hand the way I'm going to cut this with the plasma cutter. So instead, I've opted for a chamfered, or a 45-degree dog ear, if you will, on the corners, which will kind of make the door kind of a pseudo-octagon shape. Now, the door's not going to have any vents or any slots in it like that. I'm not trying to turn this into a wood stove or anything. The door is really just going to be something you can put on and take off, and just put the door on when you're not using it to keep critters out of it, more or less. This I'm going to cut with the plasma cutter. The straight lines are pretty straightforward. Around the curve, I have bent a piece of flat stock here to make a guide that I can use for cutting those, and I will bend a similar piece for a guide for cutting the angled corners. Well, that's some kind of diaphragm in here for pressure, so probably some kind of water tank. So the tank within the tank, I was able to cut up into small pieces and get out the main opening here. So now I'm going to take my grinder and flap disc and clean up both the door and the opening for the door. So because this chimney is going to have a door, it needs a hinge. And so what I've got here is some scrap material I've got lying around. So I have some 3/4 by 1/2 inch ID DOM, so drawn over manual tubing, so there's no seam on the inside, and some 1/2 inch rod. And this is going to let me make my own hinge and work something like that. But I'm going to put these in the lathe and I'm going to square up the surfaces and chamfer and bevel them so it can go together much more smoothly. And I've got turned surfaces rotating against each other, which will help out make it more smooth. And then the other plan for this is to be able to remove the door. So the bottom piece here will weld to the side, and then she'll be able to just lift off the door, put it back on, take it off. Now it's time to go ahead and cut our chimney hole here. So I've got our chimney cut off square, cleaned up a little bit. And so all I'm doing here is I'm gonna make sure it's plumb in both directions. I'm gonna take my paint pen and I'm just gonna trace around the outside of it here. And when I cut this, I'm gonna cut it, probably 1/4 inch inside that line. So I have additional room to maneuver it before I finally weld it, and that way it will sit on top instead of falling in when I weld it. All right, so now I'm going to hold the door in place with panel clamps. So this is designed to hold panels flush. This piece here will go down in the seam. This will go on the inside, and then you clamp it from the top and it will hold 2 panels flush. Might be a touch of a 3-handed operation, but we'll see if we can get it. All right, so there's the panel clamps installed, and you can see they hold it I hold this nice and flush so that if I wanted to weld this door back in, I could, but obviously I'm not going to do that. I need to remove the one on this side here where the hinge goes, and then that way I can lay the hinge across this seam and get it tacked in perfectly straight. So now the door should open and should lift off smoothly, which looks like it does. So now we can finish welding this hinge on. Now that we've got the Chiminea together, it's just time to give it a test. So we're going to open it up. We're going to take off the door, because once again the door is more or less just a cover. This is not a stove. And just got to light it. So overall, this is a pretty simple project and something you can do at home, especially if you've seen my last video on how to weld. If you haven't seen that, check it out now. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Only thing we'll have to do now is roast some marshmallows.